America, JOC here with your Ranting Politics headline updates, where we are diving into today's most explosive political stories that you need to know about. Coming up, the FDA is finally getting around to banning those sketchy food dyes that have been turning our kids into walking science experiments for decades. Treasury Secretary Besant is dangling the possibility of a beautiful rebalancing with China, whatever the heck that means. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance is playing hardball with Russia and Ukraine, basically saying, take our deal or we're out of here. Down in New Mexico, a judge got the permanent boot after an alleged gang member was found crashing at his family's pad. And get this, a Michigan dentist is fighting back against mandatory implicit bias training that apparently teaches only some folks can be racist. If you're just tuning in for the first time, welcome to America's fastest growing daily news rundown, designed specifically for your commute, run, or coffee time. Stick around for all this and more in your daily dose of unfiltered news and common sense commentary. This is Ranting Politics Headline Updates. Breaking news from the FDA this week as health officials announced they're phasing out 8 petroleum-based artificial color additives from the American food supply by the end of 2026. This is a massive shift that's going to completely transform how many of your favorite colorful grocery products look in the coming years. FDA Commissioner Macari didn't mince words at the press conference, saying they're establishing a timeline for food manufacturers to switch to natural alternatives. The targeted dyes include those familiar numbers you've probably seen on ingredient lists: red 40, yellow 5 and 6, blue 1 and 2, green 3, citrus red 2, and orange B. Macari went full dramatic mode, claiming, "For the last 50 years, we have been running one of the largest uncontrolled scientific experiments in the world on our nation's children without their consent." Tell us how you really feel, Commissioner. Health advocates have been pushing for this move for decades, pointing to research suggesting these artificial dyes might contribute to hyperactivity and attention problems in some kids. Meanwhile, Europe and Canada have already started shifting away from synthetic colors, often using warning labels that essentially scared manufacturers into finding alternatives. Not everyone's thrilled about this move, though. Industry groups are freaking out, with the International Association of Color Manufacturers warning there aren't enough alternatives available, and the National Confectioners Association practically begging for more time to find viable substitutes. Food activist Vani Hari, better known as Food Babe, called this a new era in safe food for children, while former FDA official Dr. Peter Lurie didn't hold back, saying the dye's only purpose is to make food companies money by making ultra-processed foods more attractive to kids. Some companies are already voluntarily jumping on board, with dairy producers pledging to remove artificial colors from school-supplied milk, cheese, and yogurt by mid-2026. As reported by Newsweek, looks like the days of unnaturally vibrant cereal and candy are numbered. In what could signal a major shift in U.S.-China economic relations, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is extending what appears to be an olive branch to Beijing. Speaking Wednesday at the Institute of International Trade and Finance in Washington, Bessent suggested there's room for a substantial trade agreement between the world's two largest economies. There is an opportunity for a big deal here, Bessent told attendees, using surprisingly optimistic language that stands in contrast to the more confrontational tone we've heard in recent years. If they want to rebalance, let's do it together. The Treasury Secretary even channeled famous investor Ray Dalio in his remarks, saying, "I think if Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio were to write something, he could call it a beautiful rebalancing." This potential thawing in relations comes as many American businesses continue to voice concerns about tariffs, supply chain disruptions, and market access restrictions that have complicated U.S.-China trade dynamics in recent years. While Bessent didn't offer specific details about what such a deal might include, his comments suggest the administration may be looking for pragmatic solutions rather than escalating trade tensions. The timing is particularly interesting given ongoing concerns about China's economic slowdown and discussions about additional tariffs that had been floated earlier this year. As reported by CNBC, Bessent's comments offer a glimpse into what could be a more cooperative approach to addressing trade imbalances that have been a point of contention for multiple administrations. Vice President J.D. Vance is taking a hardline stance on Russia-Ukraine peace talks, essentially telling both nations it's now or never. Speaking to reporters during his diplomatic visit to India on Wednesday, Vance didn't mince words about the administration's patience wearing thin. "We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the U.S. to walk away from this process," Vance declared bluntly. "We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy." This ultimatum comes ahead of critical negotiations scheduled in London, where President Trump's proposal, described by insiders as his final offer, is on the table. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was notably absent from these discussions, with Trump's special envoy, Keith Kellogg, representing American interests instead. According to reporting from the New York Post and Axios, the peace plan contains several controversial provisions that would drastically reshape the conflict's resolution. The U.S. expects Ukraine to accept official American recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, along with de facto recognition of most areas Russia has occupied since its 2022 invasion. The deal would also permanently bar Ukraine from NATO membership, a major concession, though it could potentially join the European Union. In exchange, Ukraine would receive what's being described as a robust security guarantee from various European and non-European countries, though specifics remain unclear. Economic components of the proposal include lifting all sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014 and pledges of increased economic cooperation between Washington and Moscow, particularly in energy production. Ukraine would regain a small portion of Kharkiv Oblast, currently occupied by Russia, and secure complete access to the Dnieper River, along with unspecified funding for rebuilding efforts. This aggressive push for resolution follows a meeting last week between American, British, German, and French leaders where the plan was discussed. With Vance's latest comments, the pressure is mounting on both warring nations to accept terms that would effectively cement many of Russia's territorial gains, while attempting to provide Ukraine with alternative security arrangements. In a stunning development from New Mexico, the state's Supreme Court has permanently banned former Judge Joel Cano from ever returning to the bench after an alleged member of the notorious Trendy Aragua gang was arrested at his home earlier this year. The court's order was unambiguous and sweeping in its scope. According to a spokesperson from the Administrative Office of the Courts, Cano can never hold a judicial office again, be a candidate for a judicial office, and cannot exercise any judicial authority in the state, including officiating at weddings. This harsh punishment effectively ends any possibility of Cano's return to the judiciary. The former Doña Ana County Magistrate Court judge had already submitted his resignation back in March, but the circumstances surrounding his departure have raised serious concerns about judgment and associations. According to Fox News reporting, the trouble began in January when Homeland Security investigations in Las Cruces started investigating Venezuelan native Christian Ortega Lopez, described in court documents as an illegal alien from Venezuela and a suspected member of a criminal gang who was residing with other illegal aliens and in possession of firearms. The investigation culminated on February 28th, when federal agents executed search warrants at a property owned by Cano's wife, Nancy. During the raid, authorities detained Ortega Lopez and his roommates, seizing 4 firearms from the residence. Court documents reveal that Ortega Lopez admitted to illegally entering the United States from Mexico in December 2023. The alleged gang member told investigators he initially met Nancy Cano while installing a glass door for her in El Paso. After performing several jobs for her and being evicted from his apartment in April 2024, Nancy Cano reportedly offered him accommodation in a casita located on the property she shared with her husband, the judge. What makes this case particularly troubling is that investigators discovered social media posts showing Ortega Lopez posing with weapons, some of which allegedly belonged to April Cano, the daughter of Nancy and Joel, who reportedly allowed him to hold and sometimes shoot various firearms. The court was originally scheduled to hear oral arguments on disciplinary cases this Thursday, but that hearing has been vacated now that Cano's case has been resolved with this permanent ban from judicial service. A Michigan dentist with 40 years of experience is taking a stand against what he sees as government overreach in his profession. Dr. Kent Wildern has filed a lawsuit against the state of Michigan over mandatory implicit bias training that Governor Gretchen Whitmer implemented in the wake of George Floyd's death in 2020. Rather than comply with the requirement, Wildern made the difficult decision to surrender his dental license in 2021. Speaking exclusively to the New York Post, he explained his reasoning. Everybody needs to listen to Martin Luther King from way back in the day. It's who you are, not what color you are. At 71 years old, Wildern has an impressive career history that began in childhood. I've worked in the healthcare industry since I was a boy. I worked at my dad's pharmacy at 9. I was an Eagle Scout by the time I was 13, he told the Post. Despite giving up his license, he still has a desire to return to dentistry, saying simply, "I like taking care of people." The controversial training requirement affects approximately 400,000 Michigan health professionals across various fields. It stems from Executive Directive 2027, issued by Governor Whitmer in July 2020, just 2 months after Floyd's death and 1 month after she marched with Black Lives Matter protesters. Wildern is being represented by the Pacific Legal Foundation, whose attorney David Hoffa argues the training rule exceeds the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs authority. We just don't find that there's any lawful authority granted by the legislature to Lara to make that type of rule. What particularly troubled Wildern and others about the training was its assertion that only certain groups can be racist. One training module defines racism as the systematic subordination of members of targeted racial groups, who have relatively little social power by members of the agent racial group who have relatively more social power. Another health professional, chiropractor Garrett Soldano, who continues to practice despite his objections, was blunt in his assessment. It's freaking garbage. You're basically telling every healthcare professional in the state of Michigan that they're racist and accusing us that we base our care schedule on racist bias. Michigan has already fined non-compliant professionals between $125 and $2,500 and suspended some licenses, underscoring the serious consequences for those who refuse to participate in the training. And that's a wrap on today's Ranting Politics headline updates. What a news day we've had. From food dyes getting the boot to high-stakes international negotiations and some serious domestic legal battles. If you're hungry for more unfiltered takes on the stories that actually matter, make sure you're following us across all platforms. Find us on X at RantingRP, subscribe on YouTube, and listen on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts for your daily dose of common sense news coverage. Head over to rantingpolitics.com to read in-depth articles and sign up for our newsletter. This is JOC, signing off, and thank you, our loyal listeners, for choosing Ranting Politics headline updates. We'll be back soon with the updates you need to navigate these interesting times. Remember, we don't align with a political party. We align with you, the American citizen. Until then, stay tuned, stay informed, and as always, stay free.